What we've discovered over the past 10 or 15 years is that you need sleep after learning to essentially hit the save button on those new memories. It's fine to use an alarm just that one time in the morning to wake you up, but you shouldn't really be hitting the snooze button because then you are repeatedly assaulting your cardiovascular system. If you take a nap in the day, especially if it's too long or if it's too late in the day, you're going to release some of that healthy, sleepy pressure that you've been building up.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Top 10, I got a top 10. Got my motivation high for my top 10. Gotta learn from the wise women and men. All my life, like na 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 na. For my top 10, top 10, na 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 na. This one's for my top 10.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because chances are you are the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Matthew Walker, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Okay, let's kick it off with rule number 1. Improve reproductive health.
I would like to start with testicles. Men who sleep 5 hours a night have significantly smaller testicles than those who sleep 7 hours or more. In addition, men who routinely sleep just 4 to 5 hours a night will have a level of testosterone which is that of someone 10 years their senior. So a lack of sleep will age a man by a decade in terms of that critical aspect of wellness and virility. And we see equivalent impairments in female reproductive health caused by a lack of sleep.
Rule number 2, stop hurting your sleep.
So many of the things that people use to try and help them sleep inadvertently are actually harming and hurting their sleep. Two good examples are probably alcohol and marijuana. Many people will have a little nightcap in the evening and they think that having a drink in the evening helps them fall asleep. It's actually not true. Alcohol is a class of drugs that we call the sedatives, and sedation is not sleep. So what you're doing when you drink in the evening is actually just knocking out your cortex, and you're going into this sedation-like state. You're not going into natural sleep. There are two other problems with alcohol, unfortunately, and I'm so sorry to be giving you this bad news, but firstly, alcohol will actually litter your sleep with many more awakenings throughout the night. And so you won't feel restored when you wake up the next morning by your sleep. You won't feel refreshed. The problem and the danger is that many people don't remember waking up so much throughout the night when they've been drinking. So they don't realize that it was the alcohol disrupting their sleep. They don't put 2 and 2 together. The final thing about alcohol is that it's very good at blocking your REM sleep, or your dream sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And we know that REM sleep is essential for a variety of functions, including emotional and mental health. And so alcohol will actually remove that dream sleep, or it will decrease it significantly, blocking that essential critical sleep. And I should also note, by the way, how essential is that REM sleep? Well, studies done back in the 1980s, some really quite shocking studies, demonstrated that if you deprive rats of rapid eye movement sleep, they will die almost as quickly as they would from total food deprivation. That's how essential that dream sleep is, and it's that dream sleep that you block with alcohol. What about, though, marijuana? Well, unfortunately, the news isn't so great there. A lot of people will, again, will use marijuana to help them relax and sort of just take away some of that anxiety that's preventing them from falling asleep. And certainly, marijuana does seem to hasten the speed with which you fall asleep. But unfortunately, marijuana, like alcohol, but through actually a different biological mechanism, will also block your dream sleep. And if you're not getting that critical REM sleep, you can actually become more anxious, even more depressed the following day, and therefore people start to seek out more marijuana to sort of medicate those symptoms that the marijuana is causing because of the sleep disruption.
Rule number 3, get beauty sleep.
We've all heard of this thing called beauty sleep, it's sort of this old tale that you would get. Well, it's actually true. And there was a wonderful study done in Sweden, and they took a group of healthy young individuals and they gave them a full night of sleep, and then they deprived them a night of sleep. So they went through the experiment twice. And at the end of each one of those, after a good night of sleep or being sleep deprived, they took a portrait shot. And then came the second part of the experiment, which was essentially a beauty contest, where they took independent judges who knew nothing about the two experimental conditions, and they just said, rate these pictures on the basis of how attractive, how healthy people look, how sickly they look, how tired or sleepy they look. Right. And even though these judges knew nothing about the experimental conditions, they routinely rated you when you were shot under conditions of being sleep deprived as being less attractive, looking more sickly, and looking a lot more tired.
That's after one night?
After one night. So there is objectively a thing called beauty sleep, and people independently can see it. Now, which is no surprise, because people will come in all of the time, and they'll sometimes say to you, if they're honest, they'll say, wow, you look tired.
Yep.
How do you know that? Because it turns out that there are
you can read people really
clear facial cues and bodily cues that express this thing called insufficient sleep, and other human beings can pick up on it.
Rule number 4, better your learning ability.
What we've discovered over the past 10 or 15 years is that you need sleep after learning to essentially hit the save button on those new memories so that you don't forget. So sleep will actually future-proof that information within your brain. But recently we've discovered that you not only need sleep after learning, you also need sleep before learning. And now to actually prepare your brain almost like a dry sponge, ready to initially soak up new information. And without sleep, the memory circuits of the brain essentially become waterlogged, as it were, and you can't absorb new memories. Let me show you the data here. So here in this study, we decided to test the hypothesis that pulling the all-nighter was a good idea. So we took a group of healthy adults and we assigned them to one of two experimental groups, a sleep group and a sleep deprivation group. Now the sleep group, they're going to get a full 8 hours of shut-eye, but the deprivation group, we're going to keep them awake in the laboratory under full supervision. There's no naps, there's no caffeine, by the way. It's miserable for everyone involved. And then the next day, we're going to place those participants inside an MRI scanner. And we're going to have them try and learn a whole list of new facts as we're taking snapshots of brain activity. And then we're going to test them to see how effective that learning has been. And that's what you're looking at here on the vertical axis, the efficiency of learning. So the higher up you are, the more that you learn. And when you put those two groups head to head, what you find is a quite significant 40% deficit in the ability of the brain to make new memories without sleep. I think this should be frightening considering what we know is happening to sleep in our education populations right now. Just to frame that in context, it would be the difference between acing an exam and failing it miserably, 40%. And we've gone on to discover what actually goes wrong within the brain to produce these types of learning disabilities. And there's a structure that sits on the left and the right side of your brain called the hippocampus. And you could think of the hippocampus like the informational inbox of your brain, in that it's very good at receiving new memory files and then holding on to them. And when we looked at this structure in those people who'd had a full night of sleep, we saw lots of healthy learning-related activity. Yet in those people who were sleep deprived, we actually couldn't find any significant signal whatsoever. So it was almost as though sleep deprivation had shut down the memory inbox, and any new incoming files, they were just being bounced. You couldn't effectively commit new experiences to memory.
Also, if you want to have more confidence, self-love, self-belief, check out my 254 series. The science says it can take up to 254 days of consecutive action to build a habit. So I've designed a special free program to help you get it, where I will send you an unlisted video to your email for the next 254 days to shift your self-belief forward. The link to sign up for free is in the description below.
You were up and dressed and ready to go before your parents were up. You know why? Because you knew something unexpected was going to happen. That's how we should live our lives. Waking up with the understanding to expect the unexpected.
Stop resisting. I encourage you, stop resisting the natural flow of epic performance. Stop resisting the natural seasons of life.
The very first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I want to get my head right. I do this thing called priming.
Rule number 5, limit caffeine.
Caffeine is a class of drugs that we call the psychoactive stimulants. And I should note, by the way, it's one of the only stimulants that we readily give to our children without too much concern or thought. But caffeine will impact your sleep in a number of different ways. Firstly, because it's a stimulant, it's more likely that you will have difficulty either falling asleep, or if you fall asleep, you may have difficulty staying asleep, that it will wake you up, and then it's harder to get back to sleep. That's the first problem with caffeine. The second one is something that many people don't understand about caffeine, which is that its duration of action is much longer than you may expect. Caffeine has what we call a half-life of 6 hours, but it has a quarter life of 12 hours. In other words, if you have a cup of coffee at noon, then a quarter of that caffeine is still in your brain at midnight. So a cup of coffee at midday is the equivalent of tucking yourself into bed, and just before you turn the light out, you swig a quarter of a cup of caffeine or a cup of coffee, and you hope for a good night of sleep. And that rarely happens. The third thing about caffeine is that it will actually block your deep sleep. So some people will say to me, I'm one of those who isn't really affected by caffeine. I can have a cup of coffee after dinner and I fall asleep and I stay asleep. So isn't that okay? Well, one standard cup of coffee in the evening, and we've done these sort of studies anywhere between 150 to 200 milligrams of caffeine in the evening, will actually reduce the amount of deep sleep that you get that night by about 20%. Now, to put that in context, I would actually have to age you by about 15 or 20 years to decrease that amount of deep sleep by 20%. Or you can do it every night with a cup of coffee. So caffeine is one of those things that you can restrict. Certainly caffeine in the morning can be used strategically, but try to limit caffeine probably after about 10 o'clock in the morning, or at least try to cut down your caffeine intake 14 hours before bedtime. Decaffeinated coffee, it turns out, doesn't taste so bad.
Rule number 6, stop snoozing.
Certainly what I've said before is that regularity is critical, going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. And certainly using alarms can help you do that. And I use the word plural there, alarms. What I mean is not to have multiple awakenings in the morning. I mean, we should all set a to-bed alarm. You know, think about the time that you need to go to bed to get that 8-hour sleep opportunity, and then set the alarm maybe sort of 15 minutes before, and that's just the call. It's sort of like last orders at a bar. Now is the time to sort of start preparing to get ready for this sleep event. You can also, by the way, just sort of before sleep, in the last hour, you can sort of get into your pajamas, your sleeping clothes, brush your teeth, floss your teeth, do all of those things that end up taking away sort of an additional 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Get those in ahead of time. But what about the snooze button though? Unfortunately, it's probably not a good idea, because there is some data that I discuss in the book where if you look at the cardiovascular response to an alarm, it's actually quite a stressful event for your cardiovascular system. We see a spike in heart rate, stress chemicals increase. Now, it's fine to use an alarm just that one time in the morning to wake you up, but you shouldn't really be hitting the snooze button, because then you are repeatedly assaulting your cardiovascular system. And you may think, well, you know, I only hit it maybe sort of 3 or 4 times, you know, how bad is that? Well, maybe for that one day it's not bad, but if you're doing that every single day, every week, every month, every year, every decade, across a lifetime, you can imagine the type of additional cardiovascular strain that that places on people. So use the alarm, that's fine, but try to use it once and then get up and have a good day.
Rule number 7, control your nap.
Should we all be napping? The answer here is yes and no, and I'll explain a little bit. Firstly, what we've demonstrated at my sleep center is that naps actually can give benefits. They can give benefits for things like learning and memory. They can give a boost to the immune system. They can calm down and quiet the cardiovascular system. So naps certainly can be beneficial. The only downside with naps, however, is that they can actually prevent you from having good sleep at night. So from the moment that you woke up this morning, a chemical has been building up in your brain, and that chemical is called adenosine. Now, the more of that chemical that builds up, the sleepier that you feel. And after about 16 hours of accumulation of that sleepiness chemical, you should feel tired enough to fall asleep and tired enough to stay asleep. And then it's during sleep at night that we actually clear away that sleepiness chemical, almost like a pressure valve cooker where we sort of release that sleepiness steam and we wake up feeling refreshed. And this is one of the dangers with naps. If you take a nap in the day, especially if it's too long or if it's too late in the day, you're going to release some of that healthy, sleepy pressure that you've been building up, and you may find it more difficult to fall asleep or stay asleep at night. So the advice is that if you can nap regularly and you don't have problems falling asleep, then naps are probably just fine. But if you can't nap regularly and build that into your routine, and especially if you're someone who struggles with sleep at night, the advice is don't nap during the day, stay awake, build up lots of that healthy sleep pressure, and you'll give yourself the best chance to fall asleep and stay asleep at night.
Rule number 8, keep Alzheimer's at bay.
The other thing I would note, by the way, that's increasingly now interesting within the brain is not an acute effect, but a chronic effect. That chronic effect concerns Alzheimer's disease. And we now know that insufficient sleep is probably one of the most significant lifestyle factors determining whether you will develop Alzheimer's. Why is that? The reason is because at night there is a cleansing system that kicks into high gear within your brain. So in your body, you have a cleaning system called the lymphatic system. Well, in your brain, we recently discovered that you have something called the glymphatic system, because it's made out of these cells called glial cells. And at night, it's during deep sleep when that cleansing system kicks into high gear, and it washes away all of the toxic metabolic byproducts that build up during the day, because wakefulness is low-level brain damage. One of the sticky toxic proteins that it washes away at night is a protein called beta amyloid. And if you deprive rats of sleep, they immediately start to escalate the amount of this Alzheimer's protein in their brain after just one night. We've now done the same experiments in humans, and you can see that causal trigger after just one night.
Rule number 9, increase your life expectancy.
The leading cause of death in late-stage adolescent teens in most developed nations is not suicide. That's actually second. It's this: road traffic accidents. And here, sleep matters enormously. So another example comes from Teton County in Wyoming. They shifted their school start times from 7:35 to 8:55. And the only thing that was more remarkable than the extra 1 hour of sleep that those kids reported getting was this. There was, as a consequence that following year, if I can get it to work again, there was a 70% reduction in vehicle accidents that following year. Just to put this in context for you as they're bringing this down, the advent of ABS technology in cars, anti-lock brake systems that prevent your wheels from locking up under hard braking so you can still maneuver, that dropped accident rates by about 20 to 25%, and it was deemed a revolution. Well, here is a simple biological factor: getting enough sleep that will drop accident rates by up to 70%. I think we need to radically reconsider the importance of sleep in education. Because when sleep is abundant, minds flourish. And if our goal as educators truly is to educate and not risk lives in the process, then I fear that we are failing our children in a quite spectacular manner with this incessant model of early school start times.
And rule number 10, the last one before a very special bonus clip, is stop counting sheep.
Does counting sheep actually help you fall asleep? Well, it's a long-standing belief, and you've probably been told it. Unfortunately, it's a myth that I have to bust because those studies have been done, very well, carefully controlled studies. And what they found is that when you instruct people to count sheep to try and help them fall asleep, they don't sleep any quicker, they don't fall asleep any faster. If anything, in fact, it took them longer to fall asleep relative to perhaps just not doing anything at all. One of the interesting things, though, one of the control conditions in that study is that they asked them just to think about a nice walk that you would typically go on, maybe a walk into the woods or a walk down towards the beach. And what they found was that that was something that did hasten the onset of sleep. So if you want to do something with your mind to try and improve the speed with which you fall asleep, maybe just taking yourself on that mental navigational journey on one of those nice walks. Also, meditation is something that's incredibly powerful to help you fall asleep faster as well, but certainly counting sheep is not one of those things.
Now I've got a special bonus clip that I think you're gonna enjoy, but before that, it's time for the question of the day. I wanna know, what was your single biggest takeaway from this video, and what is your plan of action for the next week? The science says that when you just watch a video, you get motivated, you get inspired, you have a 35% chance of actually doing something and following through. That, Believe Nation, is not enough. 35% is not enough. We gotta do something. But when you get inspired by watching a video like this, and then you create a plan of action, your chances of following through jump to 91%. And when you commit publicly, like putting your comment down below with your plan, it jumps to 95%. That's what I want for you. I want you to take action. Your dreams are too important. Your life matters. Your mission has to happen. So, question of the day, your biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week, put it down in the comments below, and I'm gonna celebrate alongside with you.
What we found is that there's a deep structure in the brain called the amygdala, and it's the centerpiece region for the sort of generation of strong emotional reactions, impulsive reactions. The reason that you typically are not impulsive and you're emotionally rational is because another part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, which sits above your eyes, that's like the CEO of the brain. It's very good at making high-level, top-down kind of controlling decisions, and it keeps our emotional brain in check. But when you're sleep deprived, the first part of the brain to take a nosedive like a dart into the ground is your prefrontal cortex, which unleashes your emotional brain. And so we see that the amygdala is about 60% more reactive under conditions of sleep deprivation. And what's interesting is that it's pendulum-like, that you are not only sort of more negative in terms of your responses, you're also much more likely to be more reward-seeking and more sensation-seeking. So the emotional distance within which you travel when you're sleep-deprived is vastly larger. So you become more emotionally irrational as well upstairs in the brain.
If you want to see the top 10 I did on Andrew Huberman, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I actually used to set a timer, and I wouldn't allow myself to get out of the chair until the timer went off.
Right.
So, and I would experience extreme agitation. But over time,